Here's one way to define add page to index. We're defining a procedure. It takes in 3 inputs: the index, the URL, and the content at that location. We use the split method to divide the content into its component words. We store that in the words variable. Then what we want to do is go through all the words, adding each word to the index. We can do that using a for loop. So we're going through the words. We'll use word as our variable. And for each word, we call add to index, passing in the index, the word, and the URL. Note that if a word occurs more than once on the same page, we're going to keep adding it to the index each time. So there might be more than one occurrence of the same URL in the list of URLs associated with a word. Depending on what we want our search engine to do and how we're going to decide how to respond to queries, this might be a good thing or a bad thing. We'll talk more about that in a later class. So let's try this in the Python interpreter. So let's recap the code we already wrote. We have the add to index procedure that takes in the index, a keyword, and a URL. It goes through the entries in the index, and it appends the URL to the entry that matches the keyword. If it's not found, it adds a new entry to the index that's the list of the keyword and the single URL. We define the lookup procedure that takes the index and the keyword, finds the entry in the index that corresponds to that keyword, and returns the URLs associated with that keyword. So now we're going to define the add page to index procedure. So here it is. We're splitting the content into its component words. We're looping through the words, and we're adding each word to the index. Note that we don't need to return anything. The point of this procedure is to modify the index. So let's try add page to index with a few simple examples. So here we have the test we tried before. Let's see that we get the expected result. So after adding the first quote to the index, we see that there are the 4 words in the quote. Each has the list of pages associated with it. The list of URLs contains fake.test. Then we added the second page, the second print. We see now we have, for most of the words, we have both fake.test and not.test, except for not, which only has not.test. So to be really convinced that this works, let's try a few more interesting examples. So now we're going to add the page to index that might be on the Dilbert.com page, this quote from Scott Adams about time management. Another strategy is to ignore the fact that you're slowly killing yourself by not sleeping and exercising enough. That frees up several hours a day. The only downside is that you get fat and die. Hopefully that's not happening to anyone in this class. I know that's a lot of work, but you need to manage your time so you're still getting enough sleep and exercise. The second quote we'll add to the page index, and we'll give the URL Randy Pausch for that. And it's a quote that says good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. If things aren't going well, it probably means you're learning a lot and things will go better later. So hopefully things are going well in this class, but if they're not, that means you're learning a lot and hopefully things will go better later. Let's see what the index looks like after adding these 2 pages. So we see it's pretty big. There are a lot of words in those 2 quotes. We can see that some of them only appear at Dilbert.com in the quote from Scott Adams on time management. Others appear at both pages. We'll see more if we try a query. Let's try a query. We'll look up in our index to see where the word you appears. And when we run that, we see it appears in both documents. It was there in the Dilbert quote twice. So it is listed 2 times at the URL Dilbert.com and once at the Randy Pausch URL. Just to confirm, the 2 occurrences in this quote, there's one here, and there's one here. And there's one in the second quote right here. If we look up another word, we see that good did not occur in any of the quotes, but bad occurred in the second one. So it looks like all the code that we have seems to be working. We can look up words in our index and get the list of URLs where they were found. We can add pages to our index, and we can record all the words in that page at the location they occur. We're really close to having a search engine. The one thing that we have left to do is to connect the code we wrote for crawling the web to the code that we have for indexing documents and looking up the keywords. So it's been a while since we looked at the code for crawling the web. So let's look at that again and see if we can think how to connect the 2.